What if your career wasn't just about making investments, but about building something that lasts? What if instead of following the traditional private equity playbook, buy, grow, sell, you took a long term, hands on approach that actually shapes the future of manufacturing? Today's guest isn't just funding companies, he's rolling up his sleeves and helping them break through barriers, scale smartly, and transform the supply chain from the inside out. And his journey, it starts in Columbus, Ohio, but it's taken some unexpected turns. Hello, and welcome back to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Mayer, and this is where we talk about the real people behind manufacturing, not just their companies, but their journeys, the lessons they've learned, and the moments that have shaped their careers. If these conversations resonate with you in any way, shape, or form, please make sure you rate and review on whatever platform you're listening to this on. Before we jump in, make sure to check out themfgconnector.com. That's where you'll find some past episodes, upcoming guests, and everything else that we're working on. And if you're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, give us a follow to stay connected. Also, we've got two other shows that I'd love if you would listen to. The first one's called Work But Make It Human. It's all about culture and leadership within the manufacturing space, but not just manufacturing. It's culture and leadership outside of that. And we talk about how we can make leadership a more human-centric way of a pathway. And then we also have the Manufacturing Connector over on YouTube. That's where we talk about solutions, not just stories of the humans behind it, but how software and services in the manufacturing industry can help affect the humans that work here. Some different conversations, but we have the same goal with all three of our shows. We really want to help manufacturing get better. So now let's talk about taking the road less traveled. Our guest, Bill Ross, has spent 2 decades in private equity, playing the high-stakes game of investments, acquisitions, and business growth. But recently, he stepped away from that traditional model to start his own firm, one that doesn't just invest in companies, but really partners with them for the long haul. His first big move was getting involved with AutoTool, a robotics automation integrator in Columbus, Ohio, where he's helping scale a company that started in a storage unit and has since grown into a 80,000 square foot powerhouse working on high-tech projects for companies like Honda. Bill's journey into manufacturing and automation has not been a straight line, which are so similar to all the other stories that I love so much. But that's what makes it that much more interesting. He's spent years navigating complex transactions, working alongside founders, and helping businesses break through their growth barriers. And now he's focused on building a future where automation, sustainability, and smart investments are able to shape the next generation of manufacturing. But how did Bill go from investor to operator? What lessons has he learned along the way? And what does he see as the biggest opportunities in automation and supply chain innovation? This episode is a behind-the-scenes look at the forces reshaping the future of manufacturing. So without further ado, Bill Ross, welcome to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. How are you doing today?
Jim, I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. You've had some tremendous guests on your podcast and great operators, and I'm proud to be part of those.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here, man. I get to hear a lot about really cool people that I never really necessarily might have had that opportunity to sit down and hear your stories. Excited to have you here. Bill, I ask every single guest one question as kind of an icebreaker. It sets the stage for the rest of the conversation. And that's, what does culture mean to you?
Yeah, I think definitionally, culture is it's very difficult to define. I think it's one of those things where it though when you see particularly good cultures, and you can understand you can define it through the characteristics of good cultures. I think we've all been part of companies that have had both good and bad cultures, but the culture itself for me is always been difficult to define because it's also, I think, so dependent on the context of the business and the firm. Sure. and what they're hoping to achieve. But I do think some characteristics of good cultures that I've seen over the years is maybe to take from like a Jim Collins and Good to Great, a radical transparency.
Sure.
around what is good and what is bad going on in the business. That people aren't hiding things from their colleagues or upper management. I think that there is a focus around excellence, both in kind of the end quality of the product being produced, or service for the customer, but as well as excellence in communication internally and excellence in how people present themselves. And then lastly, I think good cultures tend to have a focus on bringing everybody into the fold. And so things aren't just kind of totally top down. And I think that is one aspect of very good cultures I've seen over the years.
Yeah, I love that. I love asking that question now to my guests because to me, culture is very individualistic, right?
Mm,
The what you view, Bill, as a healthy culture or a good, thriving culture could be something that is completely toxic and bad for me just because you and I have different values and different things that we hold dear. I'm not saying that we do have different values. I think you and I are aligned more than
yeah,
I'm leading on right now, but I think you understand what I'm saying, that it's so individualistic that good culture can be good for one human being and not
right.
great for another, right? And so I love hearing everybody's own definition about culture because it shows who you are, Bill, as an individual as you're talking through that definition of what it is to you.
Yeah, yeah. I think that tends to resonate from organization to organization. It's where people can kind of self-select into and out of companies that they feel might not align with how they want to live their lives. So I think in a private equity context, typically when somebody comes in, there's a lot of pressure around growing a business. And I think pressure to some extent is good. There's good to have kind of healthy tension in organizations, but some folks might not want to be a part of that, and that's completely fine. And I would hope that people would be able to self-select out of those kind of situations because they would view that maybe as to your point, a more of a toxic culture.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Bill, let's dive into the meat and potatoes, as they
Yeah.
say, of the conversation. But I want to take a trip back in time, if you
Mhm.
will,
Yeah.
and I want to hear what your story is and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely took a non-traditional path into private equity for all sorts of reasons. I grew up in kind of rural upstate New York in the southwestern tier, and when I was looking to go to college, it was always apparent I was going to go to college. My parents kind of said like that's the next step, but it wasn't like push like you have to go to XYZ school or anything like that. So for me, I was just trying to get out of rural southwestern New York
Sure.
and kind of I think envision going far away for school, but once I realized as an 18-year-old, like maybe that's not the first step. And so I kind of drew a 4-hour circle around that part of the country, and that prompted me to look into states like Ohio and Pennsylvania, and ultimately ended up going to a small state school in Ohio called Kent State,
Oh, yeah.
and kind of stumbled into private equity from there. I studied economics and finance at Kent, and was kind of lucky enough to stumble into an internship with a group in Columbus, Ohio. Spent my summer there, and for me, it was one of those things where I really didn't know what private equity was, other than maybe reading. This was '06, so reading a couple of the headlines. It wasn't certainly
Yeah.
as prevalent as it is today. But once I got to the firm, spent the summer kind of really just learning everything I could about private equity, particularly in the lower middle market, companies under usually 100 million of revenue.
Got it.
And I think what fascinated me most was there are all of these small, medium-sized companies, that make the nut, make the bolt that goes into the chair, whatever it is, and they're incredibly profitable and they're wonderful businesses. And you don't study those at school. You don't study kind of these smaller businesses. And it just opened my eyes to um, what an amazing subset of the economy the kind of lower middle market was. And so
Yeah.
I made it my mission that summer to get a full-time job. Was lucky enough to get a full-time role with the firm, Stonehenge Partners, and I spent 10 years there.
Wow.
So spent 10 years with Stonehenge, living and working in Columbus, Ohio. Phenomenal city, phenomenal place to start my career. And my wife who I'd met when I was there in Columbus, had the opportunity to move out here to Colorado. And I was kind of ready to make a move and jumped at that opportunity and was lucky enough to then land a position with another private equity firm called Gray Mountain Partners out here in Boulder, Colorado. And that's, we've been out here in Boulder now for, I think, coming up on 9 years now.
Awesome.
So I spent a good part of time at Gray Mountain. And one of the things I loved about Gray Mountain was our approach was at Stonehenge, our approach was very kind of financially oriented. So I learned a lot about portfolio theory and risk adjusted returns and how to think creatively about deals, that kind of thing. Gray Mountain, it was very much, hey, what is the constraint to growth at this business today? And how can we come in, affect a change of control, and alleviate that constraint to growth? I don't know if you've read the book, The Goal. It's all about your theories of constraints, right? So that was kind of the guiding principle of how we thought, like, what is, if you kind of in the context of the book, the Herbie, the thing that is slowing this business down today. And I really love that. But I think one of the things I saw our constraint is that when you've got this portfolio of companies, you raise money from all these institutional investors, your mission, your job is you have to go invest that money, right? You then become essentially a money manager, and you have to continually invest that money, put that capital to work, as they say, and it precludes you, or at least takes away time from like spending time with the business.
Yep.
And I really enjoyed that piece of the job. And in late 2019, we had an investment that wasn't going great, and I had the opportunity to kind of step in and assume the duties of the CFO of that business. And I really, as challenging as that was, particularly to pick up a business in December of 19 and roll right into COVID and all the challenges that came along with that, as difficult as it was, I really appreciate that opportunity to be in the weeds day to day with the company.
That's awesome.
You kind of fast forward, and I started thinking about, okay, what do I want to do with my career, and do I want to keep going with Gray Mountain, go join another private equity firm? And I wanted to find a way to pair this idea of being an investor, coming in with capital, helping companies grow, but also doing it in a way where we're not just flying in for the quarterly board meetings, asking a bunch of questions and flying out, not thinking about the really in the weeds, nitty gritty stuff day to day. And so I felt like the best way to do that was going to be start my own firm and say, this is going to be our reason to exist. We're going to roll up our sleeves. We're not going to shy away from the hard stuff, maybe the boring stuff. And, we use the term partnership as a resource, right? Which I think every private equity firm out there uses the term partnership. I think if they don't have the words partner or partnership on their website, I think that they're not a private equity firm. But I think for many folks, they view that as it's a transactional partnership. And it's not truly, when I say partnership as a resource, what I want to be is, and I want this team to be is we are a tool in the toolkit for the folks running the business day to day.
Mm-hmm.
Problem comes up, an issue comes up, they want to be able to say, okay, I know, let's go grab Bill, let's go grab Saddle Ridge, and they're going to help us with this. We're kind of a little bit more generalist in that way.
Sure.
Maybe kind of the Chuck Knobloch of private equity. We will be kind of utility players, but that's kind of the goal.
I love it. Let's go back even further into your childhood there. Were there any signs that you'd have like an entrepreneurial path? Like what influenced you to even look at finance, look at that side of what your then formative years of your college and university life? But what do you think led you down that path?
Yeah, good question. So my father was controller at a kind of small, medium-sized plumbing and heating products distributor. Mom was a second grade teacher. So kind of, very, basic kind of, childhood growing up. But I think my dad, he never pushed being in business, but I think it was more of a function of like, hey, I've got to go into work on Saturday. You're coming into the office with me. Or being the controller, like at the end of the year, we're going to go count inventory. Guess who's coming to count things and rails with me? And so, I think it was just more of a function of being around business
Hmm.
and kind of a natural curiosity
Yeah.
around, hey, how do these things work? And started getting exposed a little bit to the stock market just from sitting around being bored and watching the news with my dad and kind of, hey, why is this company, why is that green arrow going up? Why is this one? And it's just kind of more of a natural curiosity of like, hey, there's this thing out there. I don't know what it is. I don't understand it, but people seem to be talking a lot about it a lot, and it seems to be really interesting. I kind of had kind of a inclination toward numbers and math always, so this seemed like just a natural path for me.
That's
I would
awesome.
never consider myself an entrepreneur or thought about being an entrepreneur. This whole sale-rich thing is just more of, I think, an extension of how do I go about the business I want to do in a way that I think makes the most sense.
I love that. That's your first mic drop moment. That last sentence right there, Bill. That was great. Bill, who have been some bit of the biggest influences on your life, both personally and professionally?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think for many people, right, our parents are such an influence, whether we know it and recognize it or not. I think
Sure.
about it like, you know, sometimes we blame our parents for our faults and sometimes our successes too. But the way I think about it, like, it's when the sun's shining through a window, a plant's going to naturally kind of orient toward that and influence the way a plant grows, whether or not the sun's doing anything purposely or not. And I think that parents probably influence us in very much a similar way. So certainly my mom and dad, kind of always pushing me to remain humble no matter what was going on. Um, I think a story that resonated with me growing up early was from my mom, who was a second grade teacher. And she talked about how you should always be kind to the kind of the janitorial staff at the school, because you just never know. They're doing the hardest job. They're cleaning up after all the people, all the kids.
Yeah.
You just never know, when you're going to need their help.
Yep.
And, it was interesting. She told me that story very young. And I remember this in school. I was sort of, to the business school janitorial staff. I was always nice to them. I said hi, all that kind of stuff, just because my mom told me to. And I had to get like a paper, I think I had to get to something in the computer lab done. And the school was closed. And like I had to get in the lab for whatever it was I had to do could only be done in that lab at the time. And the janitorial staff saw me kind of trying to, shake the door, open it. And he recognized me and he let me in. He let me in the computer lab. I got it done. And it was, so that type of influence early on, I think has shaped how I go about. I think professionally, one of my greatest influences has been a gentleman that he was CEO of a number of companies for Gray Mountain Partners, the firm I was at here in Boulder
Yep.
before I started my own thing. He I think still hands down, he's absolutely the best executive and people person I've ever met. He understands how to motivate people in a way I've never seen from anybody else. And so he and we worked a lot on one company in particular. Gray Mountain, I led the transaction of it's a corporate carve out of a company at the time called CHEP Recycled, now called 4840. It's the country's largest recycler and remanufacturer of wooden pallets.
Wow.
And so this gentleman, Norm Plotkin, came in and he became the CEO of the business. And so for 3 years, he and I worked pretty closely. And being able to just sit there in a room and watch how he motivates people, pulls the best out of really good people, was really life changing for me from a business sense.
That's awesome. I love that. Bill, have you ever questioned whether this is the right path for you?
Probably every morning, particularly as I come into the office. And my wife and I, we've twin toddlers. They're about 2.5, and going out to start your own thing. I bless my wife. They were one when I decided to spin out and leave a full-time job where I had a salary and benefits and all that kind of stuff, and do my own thing. And she's been incredibly supportive.
Yeah.
And I question myself from that perspective of like, hey, is this really the right time in my life to be doing this? I don't question my drive for this is how I believe I can best impact and influence companies and really the world. I
Yeah,
say the world, people use it as kind of like, hey, I'm going to save the world. I know I'm not saving the world or anything, but this is how my skill set, my experiences, my way of thinking, I think I can invest.
I love that. So walk us through a little bit on the choice to make your strategy as much more hands-on than traditional approach to private equity. What led you down that pathway?
I think one of the big things has been seeing many private equity firms, and I don't mean to disparage any of them, and
No.
I think that private equity is definitely not a monolith, particularly once you get down, the kind of lower middle market type firms, and there are a tremendous amount of great firms out there, but many of them will bill themselves as, I think the term that was great, everybody used in the 2010s and early 2020s here has been operationally oriented.
Okay.
And both working with some as partners on deals, and also kind of we tended to use that term at Gray Mountain. My vision of that would be, okay, if we're going to be operationally oriented, that means we're going to get into the operations of the company. We're going to be there supporting a company. And I think many firms, maybe they had a desire to want to do that, but I think the natural structure of them raising a private equity fund and becoming money managers precludes you from doing it in a way that I think is most effective. So I wanted to build this firm in a way that said, okay, we are not just going to kind of provide lip service to being in the weeds.
Yeah.
We're going to take things on. We're going to expand the capacity of the management team. Had a lot of different experiences, both good and bad in business. And let's take those experiences day to day, and just take on tasks, jobs, projects that otherwise folks on the team might not want to take on.
Yeah. I love that. What's been the biggest surprise to you going from more of that traditional PE to this really hands-on, roll up your sleeves style approach?
Biggest surprise, besides the difficulty of kind of doing this on my own every day, I think how well received it
Mm,
has been. And as I talk to particularly founders and business owners, the perception many people have of private equity.
yeah.
And I think so. The biggest surprise to me has been how much I need to communicate and tell my story to business owners to try to differentiate myself.
Yeah.
Because private equity has blown up so much, people have a very strict view of what it is and what it isn't. And so that has been the biggest challenge for me. And I think the best way to do it is just to demonstrate, right?
Yeah.
You can tell people all you want, but until you do things and your actions really demonstrate that to people more than trying to tell them and sell them.
Yeah. And speaking of stories, I want to hear more about what drew you to AutoTool. What about their story? Because I mean, you've worked with a bunch of businesses over the
Yeah.
course of your career, and but the AutoTool story has stuck with me from our pre-interview call, the first time you
Yeah.
and I chatted, and it's been a while, but it's still stuck with me. So I want the audience to hear about AutoTool and what drew you to this organization, because it's a cool story.
Yeah, AutoTool is such a great company. So the company was founded 30 years ago. We just had our 30-year anniversary, and founded 30 years ago by a gentleman named Sam Hobbs. And I got involved with the transaction through a referral from a former colleague the gentleman who is now CEO of the business, Jason Moore, had been introduced to Bassam. And Bassam was looking to kind of take the step back from the business.
Got it.
He'd been running it for 30 years. We can talk a little bit about the specifics of the business, but he and Jason just really hit it off. And then I was referred to Jason, and we hit it off as well. He's an incredible operator, career executive, just a wonderful human. And he had essentially kind of pre-negotiated a transaction and LOI with Bassam. I think gotten to the point where, okay, what do I do now? He's kind of career operator, and he and I partnered together to affect the transaction, raise the money for it, negotiate all the finer points of the deal, get through all the due diligence items that you have to get through, and then ultimately close. So we closed that transaction in January of 2024, so about a year ago.
Okay, great.
Um, and I think one of the things that besides all the people, because Bassam and Jason, tremendous people that attracted me to the company. Not just from a top-down perspective, automation, as you see it so much, right? I mean, there is this trend toward automation, and it is a long trend, and
Yep.
it's not going to be a straight line up and down, or a straight line up, but it's gonna have some roller coaster. But it'll be we are moving in that way. We have to, as a country, to remain competitive on the world stage. Think about
Yeah.
what China's doing in their manufacturing and the automation that they have. That the videos are just unbelievable. So we have to automate more. And so from a top-down perspective, as an investor, like, hey, that's great. Let's get behind that. But AutoTool specifically, I think, when you go back to kind of good cultures and this idea around quality, and I'll use the quality. I don't know if you've read like Zen and the Art Motorcycle Maintenance, right? There's this idea of quality, and like it is undefinable, and it is just kind of inherent in everything we do. And people know good quality from bad quality from being able to see it and experience it.
Sure.
And as soon as I got involved with that business, I could tell there was this kind of capital Q quality aspect to the business. Everything from how the facility was designed, the size of it, right? 180,000 square feet facility, the layout, where we've got the whole second floor that's where our engineering team is. And so that was one of the things that certainly drew me to the company. And then you just look at the customer base, right? Certainly automotive. So about 2/3 of our revenue is automotive. And I think one of the things I've learned over the 20 years of being in private equity, particularly back when I was in Ohio and in the Midwest, the automotive industry has incredibly high standards, and both the domestic and the foreign. And so when you look at our customer list, and we had the Detroit 3 on our customer list and the tier 1 suppliers to those guys, but also Honda and Toyota and BMW, and to be able to supply to that breadth of automotive customer, you knew that what was being produced by the employees there was of a standard that I think other integrators just didn't have.
I love that.
Yeah, so I think that those are some of the things that really excited me about AutoTool out of the gate, and then honestly, just the opportunity. I think one of the most difficult things outside of, I think, starting your own business is taking a business from a founder entrepreneur and taking it from that individual. So Bassam, he's still a significant owner of the business. He's still on the board of directors. He and I talk at least weekly, sometimes more, and he spends a lot of time talking with Jason too and the team there. But he's taken a step back since the transaction.
Yeah.
And that transition from an individual who built up a business, as you mentioned in the ground up or in the introduction, right? He built this business. He initially was in kind of a storage unit style office and like roll up the garage door, pull the projects out, work on them, and then roll them back in. And that's how he got started. And so to take a business from doing that to an 800 or 180,000 square foot facility, supplying the direct to Honda and et cetera, like you just to be able to take a business from an individual like that is very difficult.
Oh yeah.
And we were very fortunate that Sam had an idea around quality, not just the product that he was producing, the automation equipment, but in hiring as well. And the team underneath him was of a caliber that you don't typically see in the lower middle market.
Got it.
And that's been something that's been very fortunate for us as we've kicked off the first year of transitioning the business away from Bassam.
Yeah, that's awesome. Speaking of founder-led businesses, you've again seen a bunch of these, right? You've had a front row seat to successes and struggles from these businesses. What are some common traits, common things, commonalities that you've seen with the founder-led companies that succeed?
That succeed post-founder as the founder has transitioned? Is that?
Yeah.
I think it's when the founder just doesn't kind of, the transaction is executed and the founder sails off to the beach and you never hear from him again. Those happen. And they happen sometimes because the founder wants them to have. That's the way that's what that individual wants. But sometimes I think, and I'm speaking unfortunately from experience, I think there is an arrogance of coming in and thinking that somehow we can do this, and we can replace this kind of cult of personality that a lot of founders have that manage a business. No ERP system or accounting system or NetSuite, like that's never going to replace the knowledge of somebody who built that business from the ground up. And so
Yeah.
if I think the ones that are successful, these transitions that are successful, have some sort of aspect of the founder sticking around. They might not be running the business anymore, but they are still there to help guide kind of that next ownership, those next stewards of the business.
Got it. I like that. What kind of leadership lessons have you learned over the course of years? I mean, you've again worked with a bunch of leaders, good, bad, ugly. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned about leadership?
I think the best leaders that I've seen, whether it's innate or it's learned, have an understanding of people. Apologize, been sick here. Have an understanding of people that others maybe do not, and that they'll take the time to look people in the eye and understand kind of what motivates them, what are their fears, their hopes, all that kind of stuff. It sounds a little bit squishy, but I think that I think about Norm, the gentleman that was CEO of the pallet recycler. He could get to the core of people and teams in a way that I don't think I have seen with anybody else. I think really good leaders either learn that or just, like I said, kind of inherently have that ability.
Yeah.
And then I think the second piece would just be probably a lack of ego, or at least maybe I'll say a quiet ego, right? I think there's to be the CEO of a business, there has to be some sort of inherent, arrogance to be able to say, like, I'm going to be able to lead this business, whether large or small, and people are going to follow me, and I'm going to make it grow. There's an arrogance there, but not I think in a negative way. I think to have a quiet ego, to know that you are skilled at something and at leading, and you can take on that role, and that's what you're meant to do, but not in a way that you have to tell everybody that's walk around the plant floor and pound your chest and say, I'm the boss. I think that is the good leaders do not kind of have that pound the chest type mentality.
Yeah, I love that. I talk with people all the time about, as leaders, your job is to fill the room with people smarter than you. And so you've got to have the ego to be able to do that, but the lack of ego to be able to recognize that you're not the smartest person in the room. So it is that balance, that delicate balance that I think you're talking about there.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think, there's a kind of a CEO, serial CEO and acquiring Brad Jacobs, and he talks a lot about that, right? He's been on a series of he's got a book out now, and so he's been on a series of podcasts, and he talks a lot about when he's built up these businesses, he will hire. He wants people that are smarter than him, and he's very open about that, about hiring and assembling the best teams. And I think good leaders do that. They understand and how to slot people into the right places. And I keep thinking about Norm, and his favorite movie was Miracle. He's a big hockey guy, and so his favorite movie was Miracle on Ice. And I once watched him kind of rework the famous speech, the locker room speech, in a board and kind of a management meeting, rework that speech to kind of fit the circumstances. But that was, he knew he had really smart people in the room, and he knew he just had to motivate them and move them.
That is so wild, Bill, that you brought up Miracle on Ice, because that is the second reference in a matter of months that somebody has referenced that movie. And Garrett Tornquist, I think it was episode like 96, 98, something like that, from Epicor. He talked about Miracle, the movie, and the jerseys have the team name on front and the individual name on back, because the team comes first, the individual comes second. But he talked about, so it's wild. Miracle on Ice, if your production staff is listening to this by any chance of the imagination, we're promoting the movie here.
Absolutely.
And it's such a good movie, man. It's such a cool story.
Yeah, and I think some really good lessons in leadership and to the extent of, to the point of understanding people and how they fit within the context of a team, and how kind of seeing the hidden gems within people is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill, what's your biggest failure throughout your career? I mean, that's one thing that I've learned about leadership is we all have that one moment that kind of was a failure. We moved through it, we learned from it, but it's stuck with us in a way that others haven't. Do you have a failure like that that you'd want to share?
I mean, many failures. Or the podcast is going to go on for. I think early on, a failure of mine was on a personal level was kind of keeping my head down and just grinding
Mm,
and thinking that somehow would allow me to advance. And I think it's easy to do for folks in their early 20s, and particularly when you get into finance type role where you've got
absolutely.
all the Excel financial models and the PowerPoints and the Word docs and the investment committee memos, all that kind of stuff. It's easy to just sit there and grind because you're in the office for till 2 a.m. and you're getting no sleep, all that kind of stuff. But I, for a long time, didn't do things to kind of advance myself and think about the bigger picture of what it was I was working on. So that was
Mm,
certainly a mistake very early on. It's not thinking about the bigger picture, not learning, not asking questions
yeah,
because of a lot of self doubt. I mean, I'll got to put it out there in the public. I had a lot of um, doubt about, hey, my reason. I don't have a reason to be in this seat. I don't have a reason to be in private equity. Kind of rural guy in southwestern New York and non-traditional school that doesn't typically recruit private equity. All the reasons to not. I shouldn't be here.
yeah,
And so it was for me. I was like, I just keep my head down, keep working, and people will see that I produce good work, and that'll ultimately lead to success. And it just doesn't. It doesn't always. I think you put your head down, people kind of forget that you're there sometimes.
sure.
So that was a mistake, I think, from a career perspective. I think actual mistakes that I made, like, hey, that led to like, hey, investments not working out. I think one was early on seeing something that I knew was like the data was pointing to, hey, this is probably not going to be a good investment,
Mm,
and not raising my hand and
ah,
saying like, I see this, and unfortunately, it turned out not to be a good situation.
yeah.
Uh, and then I think I went another mistake on the same spectrum. The pendulum went the other way, and I think I went for a long time. Every time I saw something bad, a mistake, like all I did was, sound the fire alarm.
Yeah,
And I think you got to find that kind of the middle way, if you will, of understanding not just, hey, we've got to say, hey, something's wrong. Let's talk about it. And I think this is any business, not just private equity investing. Like it's saying, hey, there's an issue, and here's a solution, and understanding the context of what the issue is, and not every red flag is a deal killer, if you will.
yep,
So I think a lot of those things, those are lessons I learned over the last 20 years of doing this, and I wish I knew earlier on. Other mistakes certainly, like I made the mistake of we had an underperforming business, and it was really two divisions of that business were phenomenal, great business, great people. One was kind of more difficult, and we should have just kind of either sold that tough business or shut it down, and we didn't. We tried to keep it going. We wanted to believe in
got it.
it. You just sometimes in business you have to make hard decisions,
Yeah,
and I think I was too afraid to make that hard decision.
got it. Got it. I get that. Thanks for being vulnerable
Yeah.
with us. I appreciate that. What excites you the most about the direction that automation and manufacturing are headed?
I think one of the things that excites me most is the level of inquiries we are now getting about automation.
Yeah,
The automotive industry has been automating for a long time. They're leaders. I think I've seen stats where between just the automotive industry, between 25 and 30-40% of all automation spend is just the automotive industry. So
yeah,
I think what excites me is that other industries, not just manufacturing, but distribution, folks across the supply chain are now thinking about how do I automate my operations. And they're coming to us, and because their facilities are not geared toward automation, it gives companies like AutoTool and some of the other integrators the flexibility and creativity to say, hey, how can we start from square one with your automation goals?
Yeah.
And those are fortunately they're a little bit longer sales cycles.
Okay.
But there are some folks right now that our team at AutoTool is just a kind of bigger company, and they've got multiple facilities, and we just did a tour of a bunch of their facilities to start thinking about, okay, we've done one project for them, but now how do we do more?
Yeah.
And then you just think about I'm no AI expert, but you just think about the technologies that are now going in and the speed of innovation that is happening, and the level of precision that can happen in automation now is unbelievable. AutoTool is partnered with a company called Apera. They're a vision AI company, and the things that we can do for our customers, and that's at the end of the day, right? What we do is so our customers can manufacture something better, distribute something better in a more efficient way. And the things we can do are for our customers because of these partnerships and relationships that we have with really innovative companies like Apera is pretty unbelievable. And that's one of the things that really excites me right now.
That's awesome. You've built your entire career around spotting opportunities and solving problems where they exist. What's the next challenge, or what's a challenge that you're excited to tackle next?
Yeah. Well, in reference to Brad Jacobs again, like he talks about like business is all about, particularly leadership, business is all about solving problems, right? If a company doesn't have problems, like there's no reason for as an investor operator to kind of come in if the company doesn't have problems. If they're doing everything great already, like probably they don't need me, they don't need a new CEO, all that kind of stuff. I think some of the things that are on my mind, we talk about SailRidge, we're looking for companies that are driving innovation, sustainability, and resiliency kind of across the value chain. And we talked AutoTool, certainly company driving an incredible amount of innovation. I'm thinking a lot today about the sustainability piece of that and the resiliency piece. And I don't mean sustainability, I think it got a bit of a bad word. It became a bit of a bad word, I think, in some circles. But to me, sustainability, like our population is growing. We consume a vast amount of very finite resources. So to me, sustainability is just more about how do we do more with less? How do we complete more with less? And that's how I think about the term sustainability. How do we grow in a way that, we're not consuming quite as much? Because I think it's just a good business practice. Growing and consuming less of a finite resource, less of a cost of goods sold, you can grow more efficiently and your bottom line is going to grow better. And so I've been thinking a lot about different businesses kind of that help that. I've partnered with or invested in a number of businesses that have been kind of post-industrial plastic recyclers. And so I've been spending a lot of time in the post-industrial recycling market. And I know you had a gentleman on not too long ago that spends time in the plastic recycling market. And so, those are, I think, some of the things I've been thinking about. And then resiliency, it's all about building resiliency in the supply chain, the value chain, as there are fluctuations in, more kind of the global supply chain, whether it's from a pandemic or just like changing in tariffs and long-standing trade agreements. As those change, how can your supply chain, how can your manufacturing process develop resiliency? And I think that expands into also like how our communities and the infrastructure that we rely on, is it built for a resilient environment? So those are the things I'm thinking a lot about.
Awesome. What keeps you motivated?
A certain extent, this mission that I set out with the support of my wife and kind of having the twin girls. When I decided to do this, there were a lot of people saying, "Hey, maybe now's 1-year-old twin girls. Maybe now's not the right time to jump out on your own," including my wife sometimes. But like I said, she's been incredibly supportive. I think, but I wanted to at least give it a go. And ultimately, if I only ever make one investment and it's a company like AutoTool and, I have to go on and do other things, I'll still be incredibly proud that I took a run at it. But I knew, when I looked at those girls, like I had to give it a go and like try to show them that, hey, the world's about taking risks and doing things that make you feel uncomfortable. So I think that's one thing. And then certainly the broader vision of building a firm that approaches private equity investing in a different manner really motivates me. And there's probably some ego to it, right? I want to do this, and I want to be able to look back in 5 or 10 years and say, I built a firm that is structured differently from every other lower middle market firm out there. And
Mm-hmm.
I built a team and hired individuals who didn't want to just sit behind a computer and run Excel models and build PowerPoints. They got out there and they took on tasks and supported teams. And, I think that's one of the big things that motivates me.
I love it. Bill, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so email is probably the best. Bill at saddleridgepartners.com. Website saddleridgepartners.com is a website. Not really a social media person, but
I've pushed Bill to get more into LinkedIn a little bit.
yeah, that's true.
He's coming out of his shell a little bit, so you can find him on LinkedIn. He does have a profile photo now, which is a move in the right direction.
Recommendation. Yes,
well, I don't connect with people who don't have profile photos.
People know I'm not a bot now.
Exactly. Connect with Bill on LinkedIn, email him, check out their website. Go to AutoTool's website, check them out. Again, AutoTool's a really, really cool company. Bill, what haven't I asked you that you want to share, or is there anything I haven't asked you that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think that the only thing I just say is that, whether it's somebody like me or another, I know you have a lot of like founder owners that listen to your podcast, and I'd say I'm sure they get a lot of outreach from private equity firms. I'd just say that, they're not all the same, and there are some really good kind of folks in the lower middle market who have a strong desire to help build businesses. And certainly you got to screen for those ones, but they are out there, and people shouldn't hear the word private equity and think of Gordon Gekko and slick back hair and all that kind of stuff, because I just think it's not what it is. It might have been that way in the 80s and 90s, but it's particularly in the lower middle market. That's just not what it is.
Well, and that's, Bill, why when you reached out, that's why I was intrigued about having you on the show, especially after hearing your journey, the journey of Saddle Ridge, etc. And I really hope that's what my listeners take away from this is success in private equity to me isn't just about making that right investment. It's about making the right investment to make impact. And I love that approach that you and Saddle Ridge and there are, I'm sure, are other PE firms out there that have that same kind of focus. But we really do, as an industry, have such a negative connotation about what private equity does and what private equity brings to as the industry as value. And I talk a lot about the systemic issues that face manufacturing, right? And one of our issues as we are starting to reshore jobs and production is we've lost so much capacity over the last 40 years when we did offshore that we couldn't necessarily bring everything back that we've offshored even if we wanted to. We just don't have the capacity to do so. And every day I see or I hear of a shop closing, which is just lowering that capacity even further here in the US. So instead of somebody just closing their doors, I would love for them to feel comfortable reaching out to somebody like you on the PE side and not view PE as these sharks, these Gordon Gekko humans, right? That will cut them out and make their life hell in this process. Private equity can be a very, very valuable tool to rebuilding the industry here in the US in a number of different facets. So that's my little rant here at the end of the show. I didn't want to jump in earlier on and rant about this, but I look at PE as a tool in our toolbox that we're not utilizing as much as we should as an industry. And so I wanted to have you on to dispel some of these myths. humanize private equity a little bit, because you're a good ambassador for the humanization of PE. So I really appreciate you being on today, Bill.
No, thank you. Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think there are many firms that can be good stewards of businesses that were built 30, 40 years ago by a generation that now is looking to retire and maybe don't have individuals they want to pass the business along to. It's also a good way. I think there are many firms out there. I think about my firm, the firm I was at in Ohio, that will be open to non-controlled type positions. And the guys at Stone and Partners did a tremendous job of this, where they will help transition the business from that founder to the management team and kind of be the capital solution to, ensure that founder gets rewarded for everything he's built, but then bring in that management team so that they can be the next stewards of the business. Yeah, I just encourage any of your listeners that are thinking about those types of things to screen for that. Screen for somebody that wants to, because there are the flip side. There's still the Gordon Geckos floating out there, and you gotta in every like you do with every transaction, whether it's a customer or vendor, do your diligence and find those folks that align with your values.
Yeah, absolutely. And listeners, reach out to Bill for advice on that. I've met a couple that I now trust, even since meeting with Bill here. If you don't reach out to Bill, reach out to me. I can point you either back to Bill or somebody else, depending on where you're at as far as what products you make. And to you, my very dear listeners, thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for being part of this episode and this journey that I'm on with this podcast. If you've made it to this point in the show, you've obviously enjoyed it. Either that or you've spent an hour yelling at your cell phone. But regardless of where you're at, your headspace, do me a favor. Rate and review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And please share it with your friend, a colleague, your grandma, anybody who needs to hear Bill's journey and how he has progressed to where Saddle Ridge is now, and the way he's working with AutoTool. Those two things are the best way for you to support the show. I do the show. I purposely don't have ads. I purposely don't have sponsors. I want this show to stand on the power of the stories, not on the power of endorsement and paid partnerships. So the best way for you to support this is by rating and reviewing the show, sharing it with people. Make sure it gets out there to more people, because every time a new person listens, I get to have another conversation or two. So if you want more of what we do, what I do, make sure you check out themfgconnector.com. There you'll find past episodes. I'm starting to tease upcoming guests, other things we're working on, leadership development workshops, both in person and on your computer screen. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And we'll be back next week with another dive into somebody's story that is sure to be shaping the future of manufacturing. So until then, keep learning, keep building, and keep telling your story. I'll see you next time. Bye.